The millionaire's son was drowning, and only the sick 7-year-old daughter of the groundskeeper jumped in to save him. The millionaire surprised everyone with what he did next. Before we dive into the story, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The afternoon sun cast golden ripples across the crystal-clear water of the Olympic-sized pool on the Thompson estate. 7-year-old Peter Thompson ran along the marble deck, his designer swim trunks dripping as he chased a beach ball that had rolled toward the deep end. Behind him, the Georgian mansion rose like a monument to his father's success. Charles Thompson, the tech mogul whose company had revolutionized cloud computing. "Peter, slow down," called out Maria Santos from the pool house, where she was folding fresh towels. As head housekeeper, she had watched this boy grow up over the past 3 years, and his reckless energy always made her nervous. But Peter was already reaching for the ball when his wet feet slipped on the smooth stone. Time seemed to freeze as he pitched forward, his arms windmilling desperately. The splash echoed across the courtyard like a gunshot. The water was 12 feet deep at that end, too deep for a 7-year-old who was still learning to swim. Peter's head surfaced once, twice, then disappeared beneath the surface. Panic seized Maria's chest as she watched the small form sinking like a stone. "Help! Someone! Help!" she screamed, but the pool area was isolated from the main house. Charles was in his office on an important video conference. The other staff were inside preparing dinner. Maria couldn't swim. She had grown up in poverty in El Salvador and never had the chance to learn. That's when Isabella Santos appeared. The pale, thin 7-year-old had been resting in the shade of the pool house, trying to conserve her energy as the doctors had instructed. Isabella suffered from a rare genetic condition that weakened her heart and lungs, requiring constant medication and frequent hospital visits. Her father, John, the estate's head groundskeeper, often brought her to work when she was too sick to attend school. Without hesitation, Isabella threw herself into the deep water, her frail body cutting through the pool like a determined arrow. Maria watched in terror as both children disappeared beneath the surface. Isabella's heart condition made any physical exertion dangerous. Swimming 12 feet down could kill her. Seconds felt like hours. The water remained still and ominous. Then Isabella's dark head broke the surface, gasping, with Peter's unconscious form in her arms. She could barely keep them both afloat, her face grey with exhaustion, but she kicked desperately toward the shallow end. Maria waded into the water as far as she dared, reaching out her arms. "Isabella, here!" The girl pushed Peter toward Maria's outstretched hands, just as her own strength gave out. She slipped under again, her small body disappearing into the blue depths. Maria dragged Peter to the pool's edge and began pumping water from his lungs, as she had seen on television. He coughed violently and opened his eyes, crying for his daddy. "Isabella!" Maria screamed, frantically searching the water. That's when Charles Thompson burst through the pool house doors, his expensive suit forgotten, his call abandoned. He had heard Maria's screams from his office window. In one fluid motion, he dove into the pool fully clothed and pulled Isabella's limp form from the bottom. As he carried the unconscious girl to the pool's edge, performing CPR with the skill of someone who had taken emergency training, one thought hammered in his mind. This dying child had just saved his son's life. Isabella's eyes fluttered open, and she whispered weakly, "Is Peter okay?" Charles Thompson, worth $4 billion, looked down at the groundskeeper's daughter, this brave and selfless girl who had risked everything for his son and made a decision that would shock everyone who knew him. But what he did next would change both families forever. Charles Thompson's hands trembled as he wrapped Isabella in his expensive cashmere coat, the fabric worth more than most people's monthly salary. The paramedics had stabilized her, but her lips were still blue, her breathing shallow and labored. John Santos knelt beside his daughter, tears streaming down his weathered face, his work clothes still damp from his desperate attempt to help. "Sir, I'm so very sorry," John whispered, his voice breaking. "She shouldn't have been near the pool. I know the rules about keeping her away from your private areas. I'll pack our things tonight and—" "Stop," Charles's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He looked at this humble man who had tended his gardens for 5 years with quiet dignity, whose daughter had just saved Peter's life without a moment's hesitation. "You're not going anywhere. Ever." Indeed, the hospital waiting room fell silent when Charles made his announcement to the gathered staff and his ex-wife Amanda, who had rushed over from her mansion in Beverly Hills, her designer heels clicking on the sterile floor. Maria Santos clutched her rosary, praying in rapid Spanish. Mrs. Carmen, the cook, sat rigid with worry. Even the security team had come to check on the little girl who had somehow captured everyone's heart. "I'm going to pay for Isabella's medical treatment, everything. Whatever she needs, wherever we need to go, whatever it costs." Amanda's perfectly manicured nails dug into her purse, her face a mask of controlled shock. "Charles, that's very generous. But surely their insurance covers basic care." "They don't have insurance that covers experimental treatments," Charles interrupted, his voice firm. "I've already called Dr. Williams at Children's Hospital. Isabella will receive the best care money can buy. I've also contacted specialists in Switzerland and Germany." John's face crumpled, overwhelmed by gratitude and disbelief. "Mr. Thompson, I cannot accept such charity. I'm just the groundskeeper. I could never pay it back." "You can and will accept it." Charles's tone brooked no argument. "Your daughter saved my son's life. She risked everything, her weak heart, her fragile lungs, to save a boy she barely knew. I will never forget that sacrifice." But as the medical team wheeled Isabella to the cardiac unit, her small hand reaching out for Peter's, Charles found himself making an even more surprising decision. He pulled John aside, away from Amanda's disapproving gaze and the staff's whispered conversations. "Move into the guest house tomorrow, you and Isabella." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything Amanda and her wealthy friends believed about proper boundaries between employer and employee. John's eyes widened in shock, then filled with tears he desperately tried to hide. "Sir, this is too much. What will people say?" "Let them talk," Charles said firmly, watching through the window as Peter refused to leave Isabella's bedside despite the late hour. "Some things matter more than what people say." Amanda Thompson had been Charles's wife for 8 tumultuous years and his ex-wife for 2 more. She understood the intricate rules of elite society better than anyone. Who belonged, who didn't, and the invisible lines that should never be crossed, and Charles was obliterating every single one of those lines. "You can't be serious," she hissed as they stood in the hospital corridor, her voice low but venomous. "Moving the help into the guest house? Charles, what will people think? The Andersons, the Williamses, the entire country club set. They'll ostracize you, ostracize Peter." "I don't care what people think." Charles watched through the window as Peter sat beside Isabella's hospital bed, holding her pale hand and whispering stories about his toy cars, his face more animated than Amanda had seen since before the divorce. "Look at them, Amanda. Really look." Something profound was happening between the 2 children that transcended their different worlds. Peter, who had become withdrawn and angry since the divorce, throwing tantrums and refusing to connect with anyone, was suddenly animated and protective. Isabella, despite her weakness and the frightening array of medical equipment around her, was smiling more in Peter's presence than John had seen in months. Dr. Williams approached with Isabella's test results, his expression grave and professional. "Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, I need to be completely honest about Isabella's condition. The tests reveal her cardiomyopathy is more advanced than we initially thought, without the new gene therapy currently in trials." "How much does it cost?" Charles said immediately, not even waiting to hear the price. "It's experimental. No insurance company will cover it. We're talking about $10 million initially, possibly $20 million over the course of treatment. And even then, there are no guarantees." Amanda gasped audibly, her hand flying to her throat. John went pale, swaying slightly as the enormous figure hit him like a physical blow. But Charles didn't hesitate, didn't even blink. "Do it. Start immediately. Money is no object." As they drove home that night in Charles's Bentley, Amanda's silence was more dangerous than her arguments. The luxury car felt suffocating as tension filled every inch of space between them. Finally, she spoke, her voice deadly quiet. "You realize what you're doing, don't you? You're destroying your reputation, your social standing, everything we built together for a sick child who isn't even yours." Charles gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white. "No, Amanda. I'm saving the child who saved our son. I'm doing what any decent human being would do." Decent human beings don't give millions to the help's children. They express gratitude, maybe pay for basic treatment, then move on with their lives. But Charles didn't tell her about the call he had made from the hospital bathroom while Isabella was being examined. The call to his lawyer about changing his will, about establishing trust funds, about securing Isabella's future, regardless of what happened to him. Because Isabella Santos had shown him something that night. True courage, selfless love, the kind of character he desperately wanted his own son to learn. And that realization was about to turn everyone's world completely upside down. The guest house on the Thompson estate was larger and more luxurious than any home John Santos had ever imagined living in, much less calling his own. 3 spacious bedrooms, 2 marble bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen with granite countertops, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of the manicured gardens he had maintained for years from the outside looking in. As he carried Isabella's few belongings inside, a worn teddy bear, some dog-eared children's books, her medications in a small thermal bag, he felt like an imposter in someone else's dream. "Daddy, it's like a palace," Isabella whispered, her voice still weak from the hospital stay, but filled with wonder. She should be resting, doctor's orders, but her eyes sparkled with amazement as she explored her new room, complete with a bay window overlooking the rose garden, built-in bookshelves, and a canopy bed that looked straight out of a fairy tale. Peter bounced behind them, his energy infectious and boundless. "Isabella, Mum said you can watch movies on the big screen TV in the living room, and there's a whole library upstairs with thousands of books, and maybe when you're feeling better, we can build the most amazing fort in the woods behind the pond." Amanda watched this scene from the French doors of the main house, her jaw clenched so tightly her teeth ached. She had tried everything, reasoning with Charles about appropriate social boundaries, threatening him with their friend's judgment, even attempting to bribe John to refuse the generous offer. Nothing had worked. "This is temporary," she told herself, pacing through her marble foyer. "Charles will come to his senses when the novelty wears off." But as the days passed, something beautiful and disturbing began to unfold. Peter spent every possible moment with Isabella, reading to her from his extensive collection of adventure books, showing her his room full of expensive toys he had never really appreciated, even sharing his favorite cereal at the small kitchen table in the guest house. The lonely, angry boy was disappearing, replaced by a protective, caring child Amanda barely recognized as her own flesh and blood. Isabella, despite her illness and frequent fatigue, blossomed under the attention, like a flower finally receiving sunlight. Her laughter echoed across the property for the first time in anyone's memory. Even the stern cook, Mrs. Carmen, found herself making Isabella's favorite chocolate chip cookies and teaching her traditional Irish lullabies that her own grandmother had sung. John worked harder than ever, grateful beyond words but struggling with the complex dynamics. The other estate workers whispered about favoritism and impropriety. Some respected his daughter's heroism and the family's new circumstances. Others resented the special treatment and murmured about people forgetting their place in the world. It was during Isabella's 3rd week in the guest house that Charles made another shocking announcement at his formal Sunday dinner. "I've enrolled Peter in Isabella's school." Amanda dropped her silver fork with a clatter that echoed through the dining room. "What? Charles? He attends Brookshire Academy. It's the finest private school in the state, with connections that will serve him for life. He's going to Lincoln Elementary with Isabella. It's a public school in a working-class neighborhood." It's where Isabella goes when she's well enough to attend. Peter needs to understand how the other half lives, how real families struggle and triumph. Amanda's face flushed red with anger and disbelief. You're ruining his chances, Charles. His future, his opportunities, everything we worked to give him. His future includes understanding that heroism doesn't come with trust funds and character isn't something you can inherit. But what Charles didn't reveal was the real reason for his decision. Dr. Williams had approached him that morning with devastating news about Isabella's prognosis. The gene therapy was working, but slowly, too slowly. Isabella might have months, not years. And Charles Thompson, the man who could buy anything in the world, realized he couldn't buy the one thing that mattered most: time. 3 months after the pool incident that had changed all their lives, Charles Thompson sat in Dr. Williams's oak-paneled office, receiving news that would shatter everything he thought he knew about courage, love, and the precious nature of time. The gene therapy is showing promise, Dr. Williams said carefully, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed Isabella's thick medical file. Her heart function has stabilized somewhat, and the cellular regeneration markers are encouraging, but Charles's voice was barely audible, his hands gripping the leather arms of his chair. But Isabella's heart is weaker than we initially hoped. The damage from years of undiagnosed cardiomyopathy is more extensive than our first tests revealed. The treatment is buying us time. But how much time? The words felt like broken glass in Charles's throat. With aggressive treatment, the best specialists, unlimited resources, possibly 2 years, maybe 3 if we're very lucky, without continued intervention. The doctor's silence spoke volumes that no amount of money could rewrite. Charles felt the ground disappear beneath him. This brilliant, brave girl who had saved his son, who had brought joy back into Peter's life, who had made him remember what truly mattered in a world of quarterly reports and stock options. She was dying, and all his wealth couldn't change that fundamental fact. Meanwhile, at Lincoln Elementary, Peter was experiencing his own profound awakening. For the first time in his privileged, sheltered life, he saw children wearing thrift store clothes with pride, sharing single lunch sandwiches because it was all their families could afford, and walking to school in worn-out shoes because their parents couldn't afford cars. "Why don't they have what we have?" he asked Isabella during recess as they sat on a bench, watching a classmate being teased by other children for his patched backpack and faded jeans. Isabella, sitting quietly to preserve her energy as the doctors had instructed, looked at him with wisdom far beyond her 7 years. "Money doesn't make people good, Peter. My daddy always says, character is what you do when nobody's watching, when there's nothing in it for you except knowing you did the right thing." That afternoon, Peter shocked his teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, by giving his elaborate packed lunch to a hungry classmate and standing up to the bullies who were teasing the boy with worn shoes. The privileged child was learning lessons that no amount of money could teach, lessons about dignity and kindness that would shape the man he would one day become. But it was Mrs. Rodriguez who noticed something entirely different. She had been teaching for 30 years and had never seen a child face serious illness with such grace and genuine concern for others. Isabella helped struggling classmates despite her own fatigue, shared her art supplies freely without expectation of return, and never complained about her frequent absences for medical appointments that everyone knew were fighting for her life. "That girl has something extraordinary," Mrs. Rodriguez told her husband that night as they washed dishes in their modest kitchen. "In all my years teaching, I've never met a child with such character, such selfless courage." What she didn't know was that Isabella kept a secret diary hidden under her mattress where she wrote letters to Peter's future. Letters about being brave when the world seemed dark, about helping others even when you had little to give, about the things that really mattered in life beyond money and status. Because Isabella Santos, at 7 years old, understood something that adults often forgot in their busy, complicated lives. That time was the most precious gift of all. And in the Thompson mansion, Charles was making a decision that would ensure Isabella's letters and her extraordinary spirit would never be forgotten. On a cold November night, with snow beginning to dust the perfectly manicured lawns of his estate, Charles Thompson called his lawyer with instructions that would make headlines in elite social circles and send shockwaves through the entire establishment. "I want to change my will," he said, standing in his mahogany office overlooking the guest house where Isabella was patiently teaching Peter to play chess, despite her trembling hands and increasing fatigue. "Of course, Mr. Thompson, what modifications would you like to make?" Robert Whitman had been the Thompson family attorney for 15 years, handling everything from business acquisitions to the divorce settlement. He had seen Charles make impulsive decisions before, but nothing had prepared him for what came next. "Isabella Santos is to inherit $250 million upon my death, with John Santos as trustee until she turns 18. If she doesn't survive to adulthood, the money goes to pediatric heart research in her name, specifically funding the gene therapy that's treating her condition." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Attorney Whitman found his voice, shock evident in every syllable. "Sir, that's a substantial sum for someone who isn't family. Are you certain about this decision? She saved my son's life. More than that, she's teaching him how to live it with purpose and compassion." What Charles didn't say was the rest of his plan, the comprehensive strategy he had been quietly developing. He had been establishing multiple trust funds that would ensure Isabella's medical care for life, regardless of his own fate. He had also been researching the best specialists in Switzerland, Germany, and Japan, places where experimental treatments might buy precious additional time. That same night, Amanda arrived for her weekly dinner with Peter, a court-ordered arrangement she endured rather than enjoyed. The sight that greeted her through the guest house window stopped her cold and sent an unexpected pang of pain through her chest. Peter, Isabella, and John Santos sat around the modest kitchen table, sharing a simple meal of homemade soup and bread, laughing together with genuine joy and affection. They looked like a real family, something she and Charles had never managed to create, despite all their wealth and advantages. "She's dying, isn't she?" Amanda asked Charles later that night, her voice uncharacteristically quiet as they stood in his office. Charles nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. "And you're in love with them, with that family, with what they represent." It wasn't a question. Amanda had finally understood what she was really fighting against. Not social convention or impropriety, but genuine love and connection that her wealth and status had never been able to create or buy. "Peter is happier than he's ever been," Charles said simply, watching his son through the window as he carefully helped Isabella back to her room. "They've given him something we never could with all our money and connections." "What's that?" "A reason to be better than he has to be. A reason to care about something beyond himself." But what neither of them knew was that Isabella had overheard Dr. Williams's devastating prognosis during her last appointment when she had pretended to sleep while the adults discussed her future in low, worried tones. The brave girl who had saved Peter from drowning was now fighting desperately to save something even more precious, the time she had left to make sure Peter would remember every lesson she was teaching him about courage, kindness, and love. Because Isabella Santos had one final secret that would change the Thompson family forever. A secret she was carefully waiting for the right moment to reveal. A secret that would prove that sometimes the smallest people can make the biggest difference in the world. 6 months had passed since the pool incident, and Isabella's condition was worsening. Despite the best medical care money could buy, the experimental gene therapy had slowed the progression. But Dr. Williams's latest tests revealed the harsh truth. Isabella's heart was failing faster than they could repair it. "We need to discuss more aggressive options," Dr. Williams told Charles and John during a private consultation while Isabella underwent another round of tests. "There's a new procedure in Germany, experimental heart regeneration using stem cells. But it's risky, and Isabella's current condition makes her a borderline candidate. Charles didn't hesitate. What do we need to do? The success rate is only 30%, and the procedure itself could kill her. Without it, she has maybe 6 months. With it, Dr. Williams paused. She could have years, or she could die on the operating table. John's weathered hands trembled as he processed the impossible choice. His daughter, his brave girl, was running out of time, and all the money in the world couldn't guarantee a miracle. Meanwhile, at Lincoln Elementary, the changes in Peter had become impossible to ignore. The boy who had once thrown tantrums over minor inconveniences now helped struggling classmates with their homework, shared his lunch daily with children who had less, and had started a book drive for the school library using his own allowance. Peter has become a natural leader, Mrs. Rodriguez told Charles during a parent-teacher conference, but he's also carrying a heavy burden for such a young child. He talks constantly about Isabella, about making sure she's not too tired, about protecting her from other children's questions. He's appointed himself her guardian angel. That night, Charles found Peter in Isabella's room, reading to her from one of his favorite adventure books. Isabella was propped up on pillows, her breathing labored, but her eyes sparkled with attention as Peter animated different voices for each character. "Are you feeling better today?" Peter asked during a pause in the story, his voice filled with the kind of hope that broke Charles's heart. "Some days are harder than others," Isabella said honestly, with a wisdom about suffering that no 7-year-old should possess. "But you make every day better, Peter." "I won't let anything happen to you," Peter declared with fierce determination. "Daddy has the best doctors, and we'll keep fighting until you're completely better." Charles watched from the doorway as Isabella's expression grew sad, as if she knew something Peter didn't know. That night, she asked to speak with Charles privately. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her little voice serious, "I need to tell you something important about Peter, about what happens if—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but Charles understood. "Isabella, you don't need to worry about—" "Yes, I do." Her interruption was gentle but firm. "Peter thinks money can fix everything because it's all he's ever known. But some things can't be bought. When I'm gone, he'll need to learn that love doesn't die just because people die." Charles felt tears threatening as this extraordinary child spoke about her own mortality with such clarity and concern for others. "There's something else," Isabella continued, reaching under her pillow for a worn notebook. "I've been writing letters to Peter for when he's older and maybe forgets the things we talked about." When Charles opened the notebook and saw pages of careful 7-year-old writing filled with profound thoughts about kindness, courage, and what it meant to be a good person, he realized that Isabella Santos was teaching them all lessons that would last far beyond her brief life. But what Isabella didn't know was that Charles had already made the decision about Germany, and time was running out faster than any of them imagined. News of Isabella's worsening condition spread through Lincoln Elementary like wildfire, and the response shocked everyone, including Charles Thompson. Children who barely had enough for themselves began bringing coins and dollar bills to school, determined to help Peter's friend get better. Mrs. Rodriguez organized a school-wide fundraiser, not knowing that money wasn't the problem. "We want to help Isabella," she explained to Charles when he came to pick up Peter. "These children may not have much, but they have enormous hearts." The sight of dozens of children contributing their lunch money, their allowances, their birthday dollars to help Isabella moved Charles in ways his wealth never had. A girl named Sarah gave her only $25, money she had been saving for months, to buy her mother a birthday present. A boy named David donated his entire piggy bank, $185 in coins, explaining that Isabella helped me with math when I was afraid to ask the teacher. "We can't take their money," John protested when Charles told him about the fundraiser. "These families need every penny they have." But Charles had a different idea. What if we take their donations and use them for something Isabella would love, something that helps other children? That weekend, Charles took Isabella and Peter to the pediatric ward at Children's Hospital, where they used the school donations to buy books, games, and art supplies for young patients. Isabella, despite her wheelchair and oxygen tank, lit up as she distributed gifts to children fighting their own battles against serious illness. "This is better than any medicine, isn't it?" she whispered to a little boy recovering from surgery, giving him a stuffed animal bought with her classmates' coins. Peter watched his friend with growing understanding. She was sick, maybe dying, but she was using her remaining energy to help others. It was a lesson about purpose that no amount of privilege could have taught. Meanwhile, Amanda had been watching these developments with growing unease. Her weekly dinners with Peter had become exercises in listening to stories about Isabella, about the fundraiser, about Peter's plans to make sure Isabella never feels alone. "Charles, this has gone too far," she confronted him after Peter excitedly told her about the hospital visit. "You're letting a dying child dictate our son's entire life. What happens when she dies? Peter will be devastated." "Maybe devastation isn't the worst thing," Charles replied quietly. "Maybe learning that some losses are worth the pain is exactly what Peter needs to learn. You're gambling with our son's emotional well-being for the sake of playing savior to the groundskeeper's daughter." But that night, Amanda made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She showed up at the guest house with a casserole she had cooked herself, the first time she'd been in a kitchen in years. "I wanted to bring dinner," she said to a stunned John and Isabella, "and to apologize. I've been difficult about this situation." As she sat in the modest kitchen, watching Isabella slowly eat the soup she had made, Amanda began to understand what Charles and Peter had discovered. This wasn't charity or pity. This was love, pure and simple, the kind that didn't calculate cost or benefit. "Mrs. Thompson," Isabella said quietly, "thank you for sharing Peter with us. He's the best friend I've ever had." For the first time in months, Amanda felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. But what she didn't know was that Dr. Williams had called Charles that morning with urgent news about Germany. They had to make the decision about surgery within 48 hours. Time was running out, and Isabella's secret was about to change everything they thought they knew about courage, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family. The decision about Germany weighed heavily on everyone's mind, but it was Isabella who made the choice that surprised them all. On a quiet Sunday morning, she asked Charles, John, Peter, and even Amanda to gather in the guest house living room for what she called an important family meeting. "I've been thinking about the surgery in Germany," she began, her voice steady despite her obvious fatigue, "and I've decided I don't want to go." John's face went white. "Isabella, sweetheart, you don't understand. This could save your life." "I understand more than you think, Daddy." Isabella pulled out her worn notebook, the one she had shown Charles weeks before. "I've been writing letters to Peter for when I'm gone, but I realized I need to write letters to all of you." She opened to a page marked with a pressed flower that Peter had given her. "This one is for you, Daddy. I wrote about how proud I am that you work so hard to make beautiful things grow, and how you taught me that the most important gardens are the ones we plant in people's hearts." John's tears came freely as Isabella continued reading her father's letter, thanking him for showing her that dignity came from how you treated others, not from how much money you had. She turned another page. "Mrs. Thompson, I wrote this one for you. I know you think I stole your family, but I think maybe I helped you find them again." Amanda listened in stunned silence as Isabella read words of forgiveness and understanding that no adult could have written with such grace. "And Peter," Isabella's voice grew stronger, "I wrote the most letters for you because you're going to live the longest and do the most good in the world." She read letter after letter about being brave when you're scared, about helping people who can't help themselves, about remembering that every person has value regardless of their bank account. Each letter was a lesson wrapped in love, wisdom that would guide Peter long after Isabella was gone. "But why don't you want the surgery?" Charles asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Because I've been watching all of you for months, and I realized something important. You don't need me to get better to learn these lessons. You've already learned them. Peter is already becoming the man he should be." She paused, looking at each face. "The surgery is scary and might not work, but even if I die tomorrow, I'll have lived long enough to see Peter's daddy become a father who puts love before money, to see my daddy treated with the respect he always deserved, and to see Mrs. Thompson discover that being rich in love is better than just being rich." "Isabella, you can't give up," Peter pleaded, tears streaming down his face. "I'm not giving up, Peter. I'm choosing how to spend the time I have left. I want to spend it here with our family, making more memories instead of being scared in a hospital far away." But Isabella wasn't finished. She had one more letter, one she had written but never planned to read aloud. "There's something else I need to tell all of you," she said, her voice growing quiet. "Something I've been keeping secret because I didn't want to hurt anyone." She opened to the final page of her notebook, where she had written in her careful 7-year-old handwriting, "The day I saved Peter from drowning wasn't the first time I saw him at the pool." John's face went pale. Isabella rarely mentioned her mother, who had died when Isabella was only 3. "My mommy drowned when I was little, trying to save another child who fell in a river. I barely remember her. But Daddy told me she didn't hesitate, didn't think about the danger. She just jumped because that's what love does." The room fell completely silent as Isabella's revelation hit them. "When I saw Peter in the water, I heard Daddy's voice telling me about Mommy, and I knew what she would want me to do. I jumped because I wanted to be like her, to save someone the way she tried to save that other child." Charles felt his world shift as he understood the full depth of Isabella's sacrifice. She hadn't just saved Peter's life. She had honored her mother's memory by choosing love over safety, courage over fear. But Isabella's final secret was yet to come, and it would change everything they thought they knew about the girl who had brought them together. Isabella's hands trembled as she turned to the last page of her notebook, where she had written something in pencil so light it was barely visible. This was the secret she had carried alone for months. The truth that explained everything about her courage, her wisdom, and her impossible maturity. "There's one more thing I need to say," she whispered, her voice so quiet everyone had to lean in to hear. "About the day I saved Peter, about why I really wasn't scared." She took a shaky breath, looking directly at Charles. "Mr. Thompson, I knew I was dying before that day at the pool." The room went deadly silent. John's face turned gray. "Isabella, what do you mean?" John asked, his voice breaking. "I heard you talking to Dr. Martinez at the clinic 3 months before the pool accident. You thought I was asleep in the chair, but I was listening. He said my heart was getting worse, that we couldn't afford the treatments I needed, and that—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Charles felt the ground disappear beneath him. "You knew you were dying, and you still jumped in the pool." "That's why I jumped," Isabella said simply. "I knew my time was short anyway, but Peter's time was just beginning. It seemed like a fair trade." John buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by his daughter's revelation. All this time he had thought her courage came from childish innocence. Instead, it had come from the most mature understanding of sacrifice imaginable. "But there's more," Isabella continued, her voice growing stronger. "After Mr. Thompson started paying for my treatment, after the gene therapy started working, I realized something. I wasn't just saved from drowning that day. I was saved for a reason." She looked at each of them. "I was saved to teach Peter how to be good, to help his daddy remember what really matters, to show Mrs. Thompson that love doesn't have to cost anything, and to give my daddy the respect and security he always deserved but never had." Amanda, who had remained silent throughout the revelation, finally spoke. "You planned this, all of this. You've been orchestrating your own legacy." "I didn't plan it exactly," Isabella said. "But when I realized God was giving me extra time, I wanted to use it for something important. Peter was going to grow up thinking money could solve everything, that people like us didn't matter. Now he knows better." She turned to Peter, who was crying openly. "That's why I don't want the surgery in Germany. I've already done what I was meant to do. You're going to grow up to be a man who helps people, who remembers that everyone has value. That's worth more than any amount of extra time for me. But Charles wasn't ready to accept her decision. Isabella, you can't choose to die, not when we have a chance to save you. I'm not choosing to die, Mr. Thompson. I'm choosing how to live the time I have left. She handed Peter a special envelope from her notebook. This is my last letter for you, Peter, but don't read it until you're grown up and maybe feeling lost or sad. It will remind you of everything we learned together. As Peter clutched the letter to his chest, Isabella made one final announcement that would shock them all. I have one last request. When I die, I want you to do something that will help other children like me. Not just rich children who can afford the best doctors, but all children. I want my death to mean something. Charles looked at this extraordinary 7-year-old who had taught them all about courage, sacrifice, and love, and realized that Isabella Santos had been planning not just her legacy, but theirs as well. But what she asked them to do next would test everything she had taught them about the true meaning of family. The next morning brought devastating news that would test everyone's resolve. Dr. Williams called with Isabella's latest test results. Her heart function had declined dramatically overnight. Without immediate intervention, she had days, not weeks. The Germany option is now off the table, Dr. Williams explained during an emergency meeting at the hospital. Isabella is too weak for surgery. We can make her comfortable, but the unfinished sentence hung in the air like a death sentence. That afternoon, the Thompson estate became a sanctuary of quiet activity. Isabella, propped up in the guest house living room with pillows and blankets, presided like a small queen, receiving her subjects. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived with cards from every student at Lincoln Elementary. Mrs. Carmen brought homemade Irish soda bread, Isabella's new favorite. Even the estate's security team stopped by to pay their respects to the girl who had touched everyone's life. But it was Amanda's presence that surprised everyone most. She had been coming daily, sometimes just sitting quietly while Isabella rested, other times helping John with household tasks. The former socialite was learning to cook, to clean, to care for someone without expecting anything in return. "Why are you doing this?" John asked one evening as they washed dishes together while Charles read to the children in the living room. "Because she saved my family too," Amanda said quietly. "Not just Peter from drowning, but all of us from drowning in our own selfishness and isolation." As Isabella's condition worsened, Peter refused to leave her side. He read to her constantly, told stories about their future adventures when she got better, though they both knew she wouldn't get better, and made sure she was never alone. "Peter," Isabella said during one of their quiet moments together, "I need you to promise me something." "Anything," Peter said immediately. "When I'm gone, I need you to take care of everyone else. Your daddy will be sad and might forget to eat or sleep properly. Mrs. Thompson is just learning how to love without conditions, and my daddy, he'll be lost without me." Peter, wise beyond his 8 years now, nodded solemnly. "I promise. But Isabella, what if I forget the things you taught me?" "You won't forget," Isabella said with certainty. "Besides, I wrote it all down for you. And every time you help someone who can't help themselves, every time you choose kindness over being right, every time you remember that people matter more than things, that's when you'll hear my voice reminding you." That night, Charles called another family meeting, this time including Maria Santos, who had become like a grandmother to both children, and Mrs. Carmen, whose Irish prayers had become a daily comfort. "Isabella asked us to do something meaningful after. When she's gone," Charles began, his voice steady despite his breaking heart. "I want to hear from everyone about how we can honor her memory." The conversation that followed revealed the depth of Isabella's impact on each person. Maria suggested a scholarship fund for children from working families. Mrs. Carmen wanted to establish a garden at the children's hospital where families could find peace. Amanda, surprising everyone, proposed creating a foundation that would provide both medical care and emotional support for families facing childhood illness. But it was Peter who had the idea that made Isabella's eyes shine with joy. "What if we built a school?" he said excitedly. A school where children like Isabella and children like me could learn together, where it doesn't matter how much money your family has. Isabella clapped weakly, her face glowing with happiness. Yes, a school where everyone learns that people are people, no matter what. The Isabella Santos Academy, Charles said immediately. We'll build it here on the estate. The best teachers, full scholarships for children who need them, and every student will learn about kindness and courage, along with math and reading. But as they planned Isabella's legacy, none of them knew she had one final surprise, one last lesson that would transform their understanding of what it truly meant to be a family. The end was coming quickly now, and Isabella Santos had one final gift to give them all. 3 days before Isabella Santos passed away, she asked everyone to gather one last time in the guest house living room. Her breathing was labored now, and she could barely sit up without help. But her eyes maintained the same bright intelligence that had captivated them all from the beginning. "I have one final secret," she whispered, her voice so weak that Peter had to hold her hand to give her strength. "Something I never told anyone, not even Daddy." She pulled out a folder from under her pillow, different from her notebook of letters, thicker and more carefully organized. John's eyes widened as he recognized his daughter's meticulous handwriting covering dozens of pages. "The day I saved Peter wasn't the first time I saw him at the pool," Isabella began, her words coming slowly but with purpose. "I had been watching him for weeks from the pool house window while Daddy worked. I saw how lonely he was, how angry. I saw Mrs. Thompson visit and leave without really seeing him. I saw Mr. Thompson work in his office while his little boy played alone." Charles felt his heart stop. "Isabella, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that when Peter fell in the pool, part of me wondered if it was meant to happen. Not the accident, I would never want that, but the chance to save him, to bring you all together." She opened the folder with trembling fingers, revealing pages of careful observations, drawings, and what looked like a detailed plan. "I wrote down everything I noticed about your family, about how much you all needed each other, but didn't know how to connect. When Dr. Martinez told Daddy about my heart, when I knew my time was short, I started planning how to use whatever time I had left to fix your family." Amanda gasped, understanding dawning on her face. "You orchestrated all of this, the rescue, bringing us together." "I didn't orchestrate it," Isabella corrected gently. "I couldn't make Peter fall in the pool. That was a real accident, but once it happened, yes, I knew it was my chance to do something that mattered." She turned a page, revealing detailed notes about each family member's needs and weaknesses. Mr. Thompson needed to remember that love was more important than money. Peter needed to learn that people who have less aren't worth less. Mrs. Thompson needed to discover that being needed was better than being envied. And my daddy, he needed to know his own worth. John stared at his 7-year-old daughter in amazement. "Isabella, how did you understand all of this?" "Because when you know you're going to die young, you pay attention to what really matters. I watched, I listened, and I learned, and then I planned." She pulled out the final section of her folder, architectural drawings that looked almost professional despite being done with colored pencils. "This is my real final gift," she said, her voice growing stronger with excitement. "Not just the idea for a school, but the complete plan. I drew every classroom, every playground, every garden. I wrote exactly how it should work. The drawings were breathtaking. Isabella had designed a school that was part traditional classroom, part community center, part healing garden. There were spaces for children of all abilities, quiet rooms for those who needed peace, and open areas where families from different backgrounds could come together. "Look at this page," she said, pointing to a detailed drawing of the main building. "I designed it so rich children and poor children share everything. Lockers, lunch tables, study groups. Nobody gets special treatment because everyone gets special treatment." Charles studied the plans with growing amazement. These weren't the drawings of a dying child making a wish. These were blueprints from someone who truly understood how to change the world, one relationship at a time. "And this," Isabella continued, pointing to another page, is the Isabella Santos Foundation. Not just for medical research, but to help families like mine pay for care they need while keeping their dignity intact. The foundation plan was as detailed as the school design. Isabella had thought of everything: how to identify families in need, how to provide help without shame, how to create a support network that would last long after she was gone. But the most important part, she said, turning to the final page, is this. It was a simple drawing of all of them together: Charles, Peter, Amanda, John, Maria, Mrs. Carmen, even Mrs. Rodriguez from school. They were standing in front of the school Isabella had designed, but they weren't just standing together. They were holding hands in a circle that seemed to extend beyond the edges of the paper. This is what I wanted to create, Isabella whispered. Not just a school or foundation, but a family. A real family that includes everyone who needs love and gives everyone a chance to matter. Peter was crying openly now. Isabella, you did it. You saved all of us. No, Peter, I just showed you how to save each other. 2 days later, on a peaceful Tuesday morning with golden sunlight streaming through the guesthouse windows, Isabella Santos passed away in her sleep, surrounded by everyone who loved her. Her final words, whispered to Peter the night before, were simple. Remember to be brave, remember to be kind, and remember that love never really dies. 6 months after Isabella's funeral, construction began on the Isabella Santos Academy. The groundbreaking ceremony was attended by hundreds of people. Not just the elite circles Charles had expected, but families from Lincoln Elementary, former patients from Children's Hospital, and community members who had heard Isabella's story and been inspired to contribute. Peter, now 8 years old, spoke at the ceremony with a wisdom that amazed everyone who heard him. Isabella taught me that being rich isn't about having money. It's about making other people's lives better. This school will make sure every child learns what she taught me, that we're all in this together. Charles and Amanda, who had remarried 6 months after Isabella's death, stood together with John Santos, who now served as head of facilities for both the Thompson estate and the new academy. Their family had been reformed around the lessons a 7-year-old girl had taught them about love, sacrifice, and the true meaning of wealth. And in the main hallway of the school, in a place of honor where every student would see it daily, hung Isabella's final drawing, the circle of connected hands with a plaque that read, Isabella Santos, age 7. She saved a drowning boy and taught the world that the smallest people can make the biggest difference. The Isabella Santos Foundation would go on to help thousands of families pay for medical care while maintaining their dignity. The academy would educate children from all backgrounds together, creating generations of leaders who understood that privilege comes with responsibility. But perhaps most importantly, Isabella's letters continued to guide Peter Thompson as he grew up, reminding him that true heroism isn't about grand gestures. It's about choosing kindness over comfort, courage over safety, and love above all else. Isabella Santos had jumped into that pool to save one little boy's life. In the end, she had saved them all, creating ripples of love and compassion that would spread far beyond anything she could have imagined in her brief but extraordinary 7 years of life. And every year, on the anniversary of the day she saved Peter, the entire academy would gather to read one of Isabella's letters aloud, ensuring that her voice and her lessons about what it truly means to be rich in the things that matter would echo through future generations. 20 years later, Peter Thompson, now Dr. Peter Thompson, stood in the same spot where Isabella had drawn the school in her colored pencil plans. The Isabella Santos Academy had become one of the most respected educational institutions in the country, known not just for its academic excellence, but for its unique ability to shape young leaders who understood that true success was measured by how many lives you touched, not by how many zeros were in your bank account. Peter, now a pediatric cardiologist specializing in genetic heart diseases, had dedicated his career to saving children like Isabella. He had used part of his inheritance to establish free clinics in underserved communities, always remembering her words, "People are people, no matter what." John Santos, now grey-haired but still strong, continued caring for the gardens, not just of the estate, but of the entire academy. He had become a father figure to hundreds of students over the years, sharing the same lessons of dignity and hard work he had passed on to Isabella. Charles and Amanda, reunited by the love Isabella had rekindled between them, had expanded the Isabella Santos Foundation to dozens of countries. Thousands of children around the world had received life-saving medical treatment thanks to the vision of a 7-year-old girl who understood that true wealth lay in giving, not accumulating. And in the Academy Library, in a special display case, rested Isabella's original notebook with her handwritten letters. Students often came to read them when they needed guidance, finding in the simple but profound words of a child the wisdom that many adults spend a lifetime trying to discover. The final entry in the notebook, written in Isabella's last days, read simply, "Dear world, if you're reading this, it means I did what I came to do. Remember, no matter how small you are, no matter how little time you have, you can change everything. You just have to remember that love is the only thing that really matters, and it's never too late to choose to be kind. Love always. Isabella." And so, the girl who had jumped into a pool to save a stranger continued saving lives, one letter, one lesson, one heart at a time, proving that sometimes it's the smallest people who leave the biggest footprints in the world. The end. Did you enjoy this emotional story? If it touched your heart like it touched mine, please give it a big like. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that will move you. Hit the bell to never miss any. And don't forget to share this video with that special person who needs to believe in miracles and second chances. Until the next story, a heartfelt hug.